Now I'd like to welcome to the show Matthew Mittelsteadt, research fellow and technologist at the Mercatus Center, George Mason University. Welcome to Free the Economy, Matt.
Hi, Richard. Very great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So we're going to talk about AI, the hottest topic, and you have really picked a great topic to specialize in because there's obsessive media coverage left and right. I'm sure at every social gathering and Thanksgiving, people are asking you, Matt, what is this AI stuff? Explain it to us, and in the next 5 minutes, because I don't have a lot of time. Um, so so to start with, a few weeks ago we had Adam Thierer on the show. He's from the R Street Institute. He's been doing technology policy in DC for a long time. And when I started that conversation, I asked him what counts as technology, because we were talking about like tech policy in general. Well, what counts as tech? So I think it makes sense to ask what is AI, and do we is there a tight definition of that everyone's using, or are people using that term to mean slightly different things?
What is AI is probably the hardest question to answer in this entire field. Nobody has a very concise definition, and in fact, if you there's been a multiple studies done of actual computer scientists in Silicon Valley, and basically the conclusion each time is that no one, everyone has a sense of this stuff, right? But nobody has a concise, like one sentence answer of what this technology is. Now, in terms of explaining artificial intelligence, my general answer is that AI is not really a technology. It's a wide array of technologies that together are trying to achieve this nebulous goal of intelligence. And so what do I mean by that, but a bit more specifically? Well, first of all, there's a lot of different AI methods of artificial intelligence. There's symbolic methods, there's machine learning methods, which most people will be generally familiar with. But there's also a lot of different algorithmic designs, and there's a lot of different applications that we can apply these things to. Um, a driverless car, which most people would agree is artificial intelligence, is AI, but is wildly different than, say, the learning algorithm that helps Google run its search algorithm. And I think, like, in those examples, you can just see how diverse this stuff is. These two applications, they're not at all like. They do very different things. They're used for very, very different purposes, and they demand different safety controls. They demand different levels of training. And I think in terms of our thought towards this area, we really need to be respecting those differences and respecting the fact that this technology isn't one thing, it's an array. Now, in terms of actual legal definitions or policy definitions, just like with those surveys of Silicon Valley tech leaders which show that nobody can agree on a single concise definition, the same is generally true of policy. If you look across countries, there's a lot of different varieties of ways that countries have tried to legally define these things. And if you look even in the US government, there's a wide variety of different ways AI has been conceived if you look at the various departments. Now, in terms of coming to a consensus on one definition, they did in 2020 manage to pass a piece of legislation that tried to codify this definition. Now, I don't have the definition memorized, and I can't quote the law because it's long and wordy and nebulous. It just kind of includes a lot. But basically, TLDR, the definition is written in such a way that it can mean basically anything. It's written to be broad. It's written to convey that intelligence is involved, but it's not written to talk to any specific technology. And so what is AI? AI is a goal. That goal is intelligence. What makes that happen is a lot of things, and it depends on application in terms of actual policy.
Well, yeah, and you know, so you have on the one hand the sort of very hyper technical definition, like something you would have to write into a piece of legislation like that. But then you have the sort of kind of kind of everyday normal person idea of what it means. Um, and I wonder if it has something, if we could say it's, a computer program that sort of spits out more than you put into it, right? Because the most basic thing is like, well, you have an Excel spreadsheet, right? You've got a bunch of numbers, and it can like tell you the average of those numbers or the sum of the numbers. Um, but it's not going to propose to you a different way of sorting data,
Yeah, and
right?
an Excel spreadsheet is very good at, you know, giving you the answers that are essentially already there. When you put in a 2 plus 2, the answer is there, right? 4 is the output. It doesn't have to guess anything. I think the beauty of artificial intelligence in this emerging field of computation is that it can deal with more fuzzy situations where there's not a one-to-one match of question and answer. There's a question you might have, but there's maybe a wide array of different answers that can involve many different types of information it can choose between, and perhaps answers that can vary in length and levels of complexity and technical detail. None of that's possible with an Excel spreadsheet, which can basically just spit out the answer to the very discrete question you ask it.
Nice. Like with any new technology, there's, a couple of major categories of concerns here, certainly the way, we here on the show look at it. So there's the first, what's the state of, say, like tech evolution among the companies that are making AI applications? And then what is, as we've already sort of hinted at, what's the government's reaction been or is likely to be to those things? So uh, this is sort of asking a sort of like reverse fire hose question to distill down a huge amount of information. But can you give us a sort of like micro overview of where the industry now is in terms of hitting various like performance benchmarks? Because this has been a sort of thing when it comes to the development of AI, they're like, well, is AI good enough to, pass the Turing test, basically? Can it engage in, this sort of chat, or can it, translate in real time, or can it beat a grandmaster at chess, or,
Yeah.
a lot of Americans are used to like hearing those in like news reports and things. Are there like major performance benchmarks that we're looking at now that are sort of like game changers?
Uh, and this is kind of by its nature a difficult question to answer, but I think at this moment, the difficulty of benchmarking artificial intelligence is increasingly hard. Back in the 90s, back in the 80s, when we were just starting to kind of reach these slightly higher levels of functionality in terms of the earliest applications, it was much simpler to benchmark performance. Things like beating humans at Jeopardy, beating humans at chess, beating humans at Go, these very discrete tasks were at the time just amazing, right? There are very simple ways to gauge these things. The field as a whole was underdeveloped. And so we could all just point to this one benchmark and say, hey, that roughly shows the progress of the technology. Today, this technology across a wide array of fields is much more performant. It's actually usable. And as a result, our benchmarks have had to change. We can't have just these symbolic benchmarks like beating humans in chess. We have to actually start thinking about benchmarks of usability. Are these things providing true information? There are certain benchmarks for that. Are these things good at math? There are a variety of benchmarks to measure that. Are these things working quickly enough to answer your question in a reasonable amount of time? That right there is a directly performance-based metric that suddenly we need to be thinking about. Before, we just wanted answers. Now we have to think about performance, details. And as a result, because there are so many details in the real world, there's a proliferation of benchmarks. And also in industry, these benchmarks keep getting broken. So we have to keep coming up with new benchmarks to measure the same things. So the bar keeps changing, it keeps getting more diverse, and it's harder and harder to measure these things. Now, in terms of, you asked about forward progress, what are we trying to reach for? In my opinion, one of the biggest things that we need to strike at is actually getting these systems to really do well at concrete things and give us very concrete answers. And just to give you an example of what I mean by that, mathematics is a field that I think most people know at this point. Traditionally, and by traditionally I mean within the last 2 years, these LLM systems, these large language models like ChatGPT that we've all been using, we've all touched, they haven't been, they're good at answering language questions, but they're not good at adding 2 and 2 to get 4, right? And so a lot of work has been being put in to make sure that these systems can give us correct information and concrete answers to these difficult problems. Now, in terms of mathematics, benchmarks have been set, and gradually, industry is actually working hard to meet those. Actually, just recently here in the month of January, Google DeepMind debuted a system that works slightly differently than most of the systems you're familiar with. And due to those differences, it's actually able to beat the benchmark of beating the benchmark, which is beating the top math Olympiads in the International Math Olympiad competition, trying to beat humans at that competition. And this model actually does run pretty successfully. It's able to answer very advanced geometry questions at human level, at the level of these gold medalist Olympiads. And so that's the type of benchmark we're seeing people aiming for at this moment, trying to roughly equate things to humans, but also focus on trying to get these concrete answers. And steadily we're getting there, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, yeah, I mean, in terms of practical applications that will be sort of economically useful and the people will pay to take advantage of, certainly, concrete specific tasks that people want done, it makes a lot of sense that those would be slightly different from just the laboratory
Yeah.
goals that you would have. But I guess the one of the distinctions you're sort of like talking about is the binary goals versus sort of like qualitative goals. So beating someone at chess, that's a binary thing. Either you won or lost the game because there's a specific set of rules that says when someone wins or loses. But say like a chat bot that is trying to persuade you they're a human being, you could still have a binary there, whether like I think that that's a real human or it's not, or I think that's a computer program. But the question is like, is an AI tool really good at something as opposed to barely being able to do something, right? And there's sort of infinite gradations between um, being able to do the bare minimum of something versus doing the highest quality version of that thing. That's not can't necessarily be measured in you won the game or you lost the game. So like, in an application I'm sure a lot of people have used before, which are like customer service chatbots. Like if you go to someone's website and you want to like, cancel your subscription or whatever, and rather than having a live human being chatting with you, sometimes there'll be some degree of automation where if you put in certain keywords, they'll give you certain information about like how to manage your account with a specific company. Um, you could apply increasingly sophisticated AI technology to make that sort of chat experience better, faster, more efficient, more customer satisfying. But it's not going to be an A or B or one or zero. It doesn't work, or it works or it doesn't. It's just going to be, 1,000 versions of slightly better, slightly better, slightly better, slightly better. How does that change when like you said, you no longer have, a small handful of chunky, obvious benchmarks. You just have the sort of desire to infinitely increase the quality of something.
Yeah, and that's the type of thing that is really, especially at this moment, changing what we're trying to do to develop these systems and perfect these systems. One recent example that sort of gets at what you're describing here is OpenAI's Dolly image generator. They just released, I think, over the summer, their third iteration of it. And this thing it shows massive improvement over Dolly 2, which is the previous iteration, I think, released in June of 2022. And the way that they were able to get that increase is not by necessarily any crazy technical improvement, crazy new idea in terms of artificial intelligence. The way they were able to get better at performance is literally taking photos, looking at the caption that they put on photos to train these systems. How is it described in text? And just adding detail, right? Describing each element in the photo much more discreetly so that when the AI takes in a prompt, it can much more discreetly match that prompt to an output that it generates. And literally adding much more atomic granular detail to the captions of this training data resulted in massive performance gains. Now, in terms of dealing with fuzzy reality, another thing we're seeing, in addition to just adding more detail to data, is that training is oftentimes bending to humanity. You talk about customer service bots. One way that these types of applications are being trained is not with any sort of A/B test. Are you good at customer service or not? They're literally having humans interact with these things, go through whatever customer service process they need to do for, whatever they're being asked to do. And after the experience, humans are basically being asked, how was the experience? Did they help you? Did they answer your questions? Were they pleasant to talk to? A range of questions that then help engineers improve these things for the next time based off of the human experience. Was this good? Was this pleasant? Did you enjoy interacting with it? And did it provide use to you? And, that's a very fuzzy way to train these things, but I think it better captures the nuance and better fits these things to humanity in its many fuzzy forms effectively.
Oh, so the future, when you hear that message, this call may be monitored for training purposes. But it's not it's not a human being. They're being monitored for machine learning purposes.
Honestly,
So,
that's probably true. Yeah.
so that, so that's sort of where industry is, and so obviously we're also concerned about what is the government going to be doing about this? What do policymakers think they are supposed to be doing? Um, the so one question is how much AI specific policymaking has there actually been so far, as opposed to sort of hearings and reports and people talking about it? You mentioned the bill from was it 2020, but also, and this is something our friend Adam brought up, uh, how much of this, you know, these AI software applications, how many of them are in effect already regulated because they fall under some other broader pre-existing rule or regulation of industry in general?
Yeah, in terms of AI specifics, like I said, there was the bill in 2020 that was a non-regulatory bill. It was a policy bill. It set out kind of a general direction for government policy on artificial intelligence and mostly focused on making R&D investments. But in terms of actual regulation and rules of the road for this technology, we haven't seen that much. Um, and I think part of the reason for that is, first of all, because this stuff is so new, right? Everybody right now in Congress is if you monitor this stuff closely, they're sort of running around with their heads chopped off trying to figure out what is worth paying attention to, who should take the lead on this stuff, what ideas are worth moving forward on, what's the lowest common denominator here. There's a lot of swirl right now, and that's making it hard to do anything ambitious like a lot of people in Congress want to do. But I also think that part of the reason here is, just as you said, a lot of this stuff is it kind of gets grandfathered into, in a certain extent, into our current regulatory processes. This is digital technology, and it's general purpose digital technology, and therefore it necessarily will have to bend to the many purposes of regulation we already have. So applications of AI in the healthcare space, for example, already has to go through the same FDA processes, the same approvals that any other application in that space would have to go through. So if you have a radiological device that is being used to spot tumors, for example, which is a system that exists today, or a class of systems, that has to be presumably go through the same device approval process that, say, an MRI machine would have to go through. That already exists. We have people who look into these things, people who test these things. We already have tracks. Same thing with AI-generated drugs. Another huge, innovative, amazing application of this technology. AI can discover and generate new drugs. Well, those drugs, like any other drug, it doesn't matter how they're created. There is a process that all drugs must go through to test them, to make sure they're safe, and to ultimately get them approved. And that does exist today. And I'm obviously just talking about healthcare as an example here, but there are a wide variety of areas where these regulations already exist. Driverless cars are naturally going to get assumed into our various transportation regulations. Cybersecurity, AI systems, they're digital systems. They have cyber insecurities like anything else. Well, any cyber regulations we have in the banking sector, in the healthcare sector, or across critical infrastructure, all of that naturally applies to artificial intelligence as well as every other digital system. And so recognizing that, I think one of the big problems that people in Congress, people in the executive are facing right now in terms of doing something, and they all want to do something, it's figuring out what is out there. How exactly do these new technologies and their many, many applications across all of these domains fit? How are they regulated today? How are they not regulated today? And are there any problems that perhaps need regulation or might sit outside the current regulatory apparatus? There's immense uncertainty over all those questions, and nobody seems to have really concrete, good answers. And I think moving forward, that fundamental question is going to hold things back, hopefully. um, and if it doesn't, I think we do risk breaking things, because inevitably Congress people, if they're overzealous and if they do something to just do something and act to just act, they're gonna repeat past legislation, re-regulate things that have already been regulated, and we're really just gonna make it hard to continue the very fast innovation we're already seeing in this space.
Right. So if I use an AI application to steal your credit card information, turns out stealing credit card information is already illegal. So
Yeah,
that would doing it via AI doesn't make any difference. Uh, and programming an AI murder bot would also fall under the don't murder people rule. So already illegal.
yeah,
Um,
and the question regulators obviously have is does making that illegal actually prevent that problem? In many cases, the answer maybe is no, maybe is not. But that's kind of the honest of their focus. But to your point, most of these things, these really bad things like murder, right? That's already illegal. So we can rest easy about that one.
the so now obviously there's a lot of people worried about future either present or future more powerful AI tools being developed and used by countries that may be hostile to the U.S. So obviously that includes U.S. firms being outcompeted potentially or theoretically having their technology stolen via industrial espionage, but also foreign nations that will use AI-powered weapons against the U.S. militarily. Both of those concerns, I think, center often on the People's Republic of China, considered a strategic adversary in some ways of the United States. And I'm sure there's other countries that have programs we might be concerned about, but China seems to be at the top of a lot of conversations, certainly. So, um, how much should we be worried about this stuff? I guess is the short answer. Those are two big categories. One competition wise, and one sort of like military national security wise.
So to this question, I basically have two answers. Answer A is yes, we should be concerned. We should not let China and their tech sector overtake ours. I think, first of all, for our own selfish benefit, right? I would rather have our country benefiting from the abundance and technological gains that these technologies could provide for us. But second of all, the technologies, the chat GPT like technologies that the People's Republic might end up pushing out aren't going to be quite as theoretically quite as liberal as ours. They're going to potentially be just fire hoses for Xi Jinping thought and pushing out communist propaganda. And I think that is not something that we should encourage. We should try and fight against that through rigorous technological competition. Now, in terms of my second view of this is, yes, that's something to be concerned of, but at present, I'm not actually all that concerned, because I think the restrictions and the rules and the regulations and the fundamental controls that People's Republic has on speech means that they're just not going to be as innovative and dynamic as us. Um, Most people know, I think, that these systems, they're trained on big data. And in order to get a good quality system, one that really reflects reality and can do a lot of things, you don't need just big data, you need diverse data and accurate data. And one thing that I think China doesn't necessarily have, while they have a lot of data on they got 1 billion people, and so there's a lot of data to mine there, but what they don't necessarily have is diverse data, data that is free, data that is varied, data that has a lot of detail and nuance and variety, which is essential for making the next generation and current generation of really good systems. And because they have so many restrictions, they just have a terrible data environment, one that is full of lying, that is full of mistruths, that is largely chilled by the government. And I just don't think that is going to be competitive long term. Because we are more free, we have better data, and ultimately we'll have better systems.
So ChatGPT will help you do a book report or write a research study on the Tiananmen Square massacre. But Chat PRC will just return a blank screen if you ask what
Oh
happened
yeah,
in Tiananmen Square in 1989.
and we've already plenty of people have tried this one. It definitely does not do that. Um, and I think, we should be wary about censorship here, but clearly we're doing a little bit better because ours can talk about Tiananmen Square, theirs cannot. So that's one point in our favor.
It'll even talk about the bad things that happened in this country, which right.
It will, especially if you explicitly try and provoke it to.
Mhm. So, when it from that angle, when we're talking about international competition with countries like China, countries that are, generally considered strategic adversaries of the U.S., we often get in sort of a zero-sum mode, whether, either they'll be ahead or we'll be ahead, or they'll have the technology or we'll have the technology. But it seems like in AI, especially some of the people who are the theorists, the big thinkers about it, we have a kind of another opportunity here because, I mean, technological competition in the modern world often involves one particular company or firm developing and patenting proprietary new products and applications, and then sometimes they diffuse that into the wider economy because they're licensed to other companies and things. But there are a significant number of people working in AI, research, and I guess you could call it AI philosophy is its own sub branch now. That said that they want to make discoveries available they want to have open source models, they want to have widely shared technology, they want to have high level of diffusion, and not have everything be patented and proprietary. How much will that change the game here, and how much of that is different from, say, the companies that develop, microprocessors today, who generally do not employ that strategy?
I think it's going to be incredibly, the game is going to change a lot. And I think hopefully for the better. Um, as this conversation has evolved over the last 10 years, this sort of AI race with China, I think one of the big faults of the national security world and the policy world, and really the vast, vast majority of these conversations has been this zero sum thinking, which really tends to push people towards trying to get the latest, greatest, best research paper, right? There's a race to the top of papers. There is not a race to the top in terms of usable products, abundance creation, and things that actually matter. And frankly, you can have the best research paper in the world, but that doesn't matter unless you can actually use that. Now, what I'm really hopeful about with the current environment, where we've got all these wonderful proprietary systems, but also this huge diversity of open source systems, which are taking those ideas and just running with them in all sorts of directions, is that hopefully we're moving to a point where this stuff really, diffuses broadly across the economy. There's so many different types of AI you can get your hands on. Because it's open source, you can get your hands on applications very easily. And what that's going to enable is us to start applying this stuff and to start iterating on it, figuring out use cases, figuring out complementary inventions, things that you can build upon these things to actually unlock greater abundance, greater use cases, and more things like that. And frankly, if our industrial policy or China's industrial policy is just focused on getting that latest, greatest research paper, there's so much that it's so shallow. There's so much we'll miss out on. And in my opinion, the best way to compete with China and to win this supposed race is just to focus on getting that stuff out there, focus on creating abundance, figuring out how this stuff works, and really leading the world in AI application so that we can be the most prosperous nation, have more money to invest, race ahead, and continue to have the best science and the most creativity.
Yeah, it seems like, the United States specializes in a consumer economy, which is, uh, private sector investment is really driven by consumer preferences and delivering tangible results, products, and services to people who are willing to pay for them. Um, is 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 that itself is the path of getting from sort of theoretical policy paper, which is written perhaps by a very brilliant researcher, to the stuff that will make people's life better, which is hopefully what the end goal of all of this is. Um, and and that kind of brings me to sort of like the wrap up here, which is like the impact on the normal person who is not an AI researcher or a public policy scholar. How much of the debate that's going on now between, A, how government's going to regulate AI generally, B, what's our stance versus, uh, adversaries like PRC potentially, how much of that is going to have anything to do with the person at their laptop? Like someone is wants ChatGPT to summarize a list of facts for them. So they want Midjourney to make a really cool picture of a unicorn flying through outer space, uh, or any of the other sort of fun consumer level AI tools.
Yeah, I
Are the are
think
those policies going to are we going to feel it at our laptop? Are we going to notice it? Are there things that are going to potentially go away because they get regulated away? Or is it just going to be, or are we worried things are going to be slower than faster in terms of reaching us?
I think I'll answer that in two ways. First of all, I think you will notice it. If there are strict enough regulations, strict enough controls on these things, and we're already starting to feel this to a certain extent, these things are just going to become less capable. You're not going to be able to generate images of anybody and anything that you want using Dolly or whatever, Midjourney or whatever image generator you want, because IP will have restrictions on it, and there will be restrictions on generating real life people. These are the types of things we're hearing talked about, and these are the types of things in terms of direct usability people will notice. I personally have noticed lately that a lot of the image generators aren't working very well. Just last week, I tried to generate a silly photo of George Washington, but I was blocked because he's a real life person, and apparently that would be offensive to him. Which obviously, no, but, that's the type of thing we can expect more of if we start to get much more restrictive, intense regulations. Now, in terms of my worries, however, what I'm more worried about is what people will not notice. And that is the range of applications that are going to be much more transformative, in my opinion, than ChatGPT. Things like AI drug development, AI materials discovery. We got AI systems right now discovering new types of mathematics, which is absolutely insane. These are the cutting edge things that I think will really transform our lives. And unfortunately, because of narratives and because people are just familiar with ChatGPT, people don't know these things are out there and that they exist. And they don't really know about the potential transformation they could have in their lives if we unleash these things. And so my worry is that regulation is going to slow these things down, inhibit their ability to diffuse and have impact on society, and really deny people a future that they could have. And unfortunately, most people, your average person, won't notice that because they don't know what they can't have. And that's scary, right? That's a scary thing to think about, this wonderful future we could not have, that no one would know to advocate for because they just don't know it could exist. And so I think we need to be very careful here with any regulation to make sure that we are proving this technology to people, proving how it can be beneficial to them, showing them how these other types of applications like drug development can help them, and showing them the cost of this, of losing this technology to regulation. So let's not overregulate this stuff. Let's make sure it happens, and let's make sure that this AI diffusion process happens rapidly.
All right. I want all the stuff. I want all the cool stuff. I want goofy
Same.
pictures of George Washington. I want new AI drugs. All I'm an abundance optimist. All right, Matt, thank you so much for being with us. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I'm sure there'll be plenty to revisit in the future. Before we go, please tell everyone where they can find you online.
You can find me on X, or formerly Twitter, at Matt in the Mittel, spelled Mittel. And I also have a Substack, where I write about AI policy, called Digital Spirits. You can find me at Substack.
All right, Matt, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.